all this kind of money-making kind of scheme, and it's all through the vet school, and it's just like, what are we doing here?
I don't think people are talking about it.
Nobody
Never heard
talks
of it.
about it. And the people in it that are doing it, they don't even really see it because everybody's, no, this is, yeah, we all do it. Yeah,
This is
everybody
how we
does
do
it.
it.
This is we do it.
This
And
is
you just,
normal
again,
now.
the abnormal becomes normal.
Welcome to the Plant Frequencies podcast. You and I have been friends for several years through the farmers markets.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And give us the 30,000 foot view of your kind of career journey. How did you get to this point where you're at today? What have been some of the maybe highlights along the way?
Yeah, well, I've never really known a time where I didn't want to be a veterinarian. So at a very early age, I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. I think originally I thought I wanted to be dogs and cats, but my father had a farm. My parents divorced. My father moved to the country and had a farm and cows and horses and chickens and dogs. And I split time, more time with my mother, but still split a good bit of time with my father in the country. I was around cows, and he had a good friend who was a large animal veterinarian at the time who was doing a lot of surgical embryo transfer. It was just had been developed actually here at CSU by a famous reproductive physiologist, Dr. Seidel. I kind of caught the bug. I worked for him and his farm and was around a lot of cows and just really enjoyed being around cows. And so very early on, I had my eyes on being a dairy cattle veterinarian and went to college at the University of Georgia. Was a dairy science major, worked at the university dairy there. When I graduated Georgia, I moved back to Virginia and managed a dairy in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia for a couple years, and then moved out to Colorado and managed a bigger farm, getting residency, and then ultimately getting into vet school here at CSU. And then after vet school, before, during, and after, I worked for that famous reproductive physiologist, Dr. Seidel, and at the time they were doing a lot of research to develop the process to sex semen, to sort male and female sperm in cattle and horses is what they were focused on. But it's the same process that they use in humans today too, and that was all done at CSU, and I was a big part of that and learned a lot of advanced reproductive techniques, reproductive ultrasound, IVF, embryo transfer, and I built the practice around reproduction. So dairy cows, and selecting for just milk production and increasing milk production every year for the last close to 100 years, we've ignored reproduction. It's a lowly heritable trait, and you can't get a lot of gains in it quickly, and so people really ignore it. But over time, even a lowly heritable trait adds up, and it seems like there are a lot of traits that are inversely correlated with high milk production that are negative for reproduction. So it kind of caught up to us in the late 90s, early 2000s when I was finishing vet school and doing my master's. And all animal agriculture revolves around pregnancy and having babies, and in dairy cows, not only having more babies, but starting a new lactation, and that's where you get your milk from. So it's essential to having a dairy. And so when you don't have it happening, you get in a financial bind. And so I saw a unique kind of niche, and so just started a practice out of scratch. And as I was doing my master's, and it blew up, and then I had 15 employees. It was a mix of veterinarians and technicians, and we were doing a lot of reproductive ultrasound. And because we were collecting so much high-level data, reproductive data with the ultrasound, we were also of interest of companies that were developing products around reproduction. So we did a lot of contract research for companies and universities. And reproductive ultrasound, I was kind of a pioneer in that in cattle. And so there were a lot of people that wanted to learn that skill, and so came to us for training all over the world and learning our protocols that I built during my master's to improve fertility in dairy cows. It went really well until that technology that I helped to develop, sex semen, became commercially available, and the dairy industry adopted it wholeheartedly, and it transformed the industry to where it wasn't that important to get cows pregnant. I mean, it was important to get them pregnant, but you had so many female younger ones coming on in the pipeline that you were just dealing with a much younger population of cows. And mammals younger is always better fertility. And so they just culled and got rid of older cows. So the average age of dairy cows went from when I was a kid, it was like 7.5 years, to now it's like 4 years old is the average age of dairy cows when they expire, either at slaughter or just dropping dead on a place. My practice, started to become negatively affected by that. I started a small dairy in conjunction with my veterinary practice because a lot of the training and research that we had been doing on my client's herd. I have several big dairy. Colorado's a big dairy state. They don't have a whole lot of dairies, but the dairies we have are very big. So our average dairy size in Colorado, I haven't looked in a few years, but it's over 3,000 cows. It's probably close to 5,000 now is the average size. And so I had several of those, and that's where we did all the research. But some research projects really aren't amendable. They aren't amendable to that. So starting my own small dairy was a good way to then open up more doors for research and facilitate more in-depth training. And I always, having managed dairies, felt I could do it better and wanted to have more control. As a veterinarian, you can only advise, and they don't have to take your advice. And that's why I started selling direct. Is I wanted to be able to market a different way to manage and take care of cows, because while the industry says healthier cows and maximizing take care of my cows maximizes profit in a vacuum, maybe in an ideal setting, but in the real world, things that maximize profit don't necessarily correlate with maximizing welfare of the cow. And that's everybody was advocating for how to make the producer more money and more efficient, but again, those things don't always align with better cow welfare. And I kept looking around the room and some of these meetings, just scratching my head that where's the person that is sticking up for their cow? Like, I'm the only one here. Nobody else is, these dairymen now, the big ones, they make so much money, and the vendors that sell to them make so much money that if you lose that account, that can be 20 to 50% of your gross income. And so it gets very hard to draw a line in the sand, and tell somebody they're wrong when, you could potentially lose that customer. So a lot of people just look the other way and tell them what they want to hear and keep selling product. But I couldn't do that. I went into veterinary medicine because I loved animals, not because I loved producers. So
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's podcast, B Micro, the easiest way to sneak vegetables into any meal. Due to soil depletion, GMOs, and monocropping, Americans are not getting enough nutrients. So in 2018, I founded B Micro, the first freeze-dried microgreens company in the US to help Americans get more concentrated natural nutrients into their diet. Microgreens are a phase in the plant's life when they're 14 days old and naturally the most concentrated in vitamins, minerals, nutrients, all the good things that we need. Our microgreens are grown here in the US in soil and a greenhouse. They're certified USDA organic and regenerative organic. We grow, wash, and freeze dry them to extend their 1 week shelf life to over 1 year, allowing us to ship anywhere in the US without the worry of spoilage. We have 2 flavors, broccoli, backed by over 2,000 studies on sulforaphane and its powerful detox benefits, and a blend of red cabbage, radish, and broccoli, the most potent detox formula we've tested, offering you the most bang for your buck. Easily sneak these microgreens in any meal. Eggs, smoothies, pizza, pasta, even your kids' mac and cheese, you can't even taste it. Use code STEVE15 to save at bmicro.farm.
I had this dairy that was conventional that I'd started in conjunction with my vet practice. We were milking about 130 cows, managing traditionally when you sell into a commodity market. So the co-op comes and brings a tractor trailer. Those tractor trailers you see driving around the highway, comes and picks up your milk every couple days. They take it back or take it to a processing center in Denver, a creamery that maybe is going to pasteurize it and bottle it and sell it in milk at all the Krogers or King Supers or Walmarts, or somebody, Leprino's a big buyer. He's a mozzarella maker, the world's largest in Greeley. He has a big processing plant there that needs, I think it's around 200,000 cows. They estimate feed the milk that runs that factory up in Greeley. And so they're the ones in their marketing and negotiating prices and affecting, some of the prices of your milk. And a lot of the price of your milk is set nationally by some weird formulas that the USDA is a part of that nobody really understands. But in that system, if you don't manage traditionally, and one big thing that I'll talk about more further with you that really affects the quality of the products and how it affects people is feeding grain to cows. So that makes a lot of milk. So my cows, and I, felt like I took the best care of my cows in that system, but they were averaging about 10 and a half gallons a day per cow across there. I don't feed any grain now, and the calves or stay on the cows a minimum 4 months, so they're drinking a bunch of milk. But we average about 2 to 3 gallons a day. So going from 10 plus to 2 or 3, that's a huge change in the amount of milk that you can sell. And luckily, I can sell it direct and sell it for a premium. And so that, the people are nice enough to appreciate what I do and pay that premium that affords me the ability to manage this way. But in a commodity market, you're not going to get paid any different. There are very few things, and it's more about quality of the milk. Some things that affect longevity and shelf life, and some taste, that you get paid more for. But beyond that, you're just getting paid for pounds of protein, pounds of fat, and milk solids, and a little bit of volume. And so that grain, which is very cheap compared to pasture, hay, silage, makes you a lot more milk. And so every producer in the commodity market is feeding some level of grain. And it's interesting, and I try to educate people, and maybe we can talk further about this. Grass fed, which is a big kind of label now that everybody's all fired up about. In the dairy industry, it means nothing. I mean, it means whatever you think it means. And the dairy industry hopes you think it means no grain, but that's not what it means. There's no definition. The USDA, there's no enforcement now. If you stamp your product with organic, that has to meet standards. And there's some fudging around that. And we can talk about why I don't think organic is the best, especially related to animal welfare. But you can throw grass fed on any label, and the USDA is not coming to enforce and check on anything that you're doing. And so you're left to believe and trust those people, and they lie to you all the time. The dairy industry, I think, lies more than any other industry, or misrepresents themselves more than any other industry as far as what they project and advertise. But grass fed, really, the only thing that it really means is cows are let out of the barn and go out and munch on a little grass, but it means nothing about what else you feed them. And so, because it makes so much more milk, even cows in Ireland and New Zealand that carry gold butter that you buy, the cows that make that, when they come in the milking parlor, they have contraptions that dump 10 to 15 pounds of grain to them. And that's what entices them in the milking parlor. In the US, where we don't really do that, we feed it in the ration. In the UK or in Ireland and New Zealand, they do go out to the pasture, and the majority of everything they're eating out there is the pasture. But when they come in, they get that grain. But in the US, we feed everything to them right in front of them. So it's easy for us to mix up the grain there, but they'll get 10 to 15 pounds of grain. You can't buy milk in the store that those cows that produce that milk aren't eating some level of grain. Now, those cows in New Zealand and Ireland are eating 10 to 15, and maybe a little less at the peak grass growing season. Um, in the US, we feed even more. So they'll get 20 to 25 pounds of grain a day is what they'll average. So a lot of grain that makes a lot of milk, but it changes the conformation of the milk, and then the way that interacts with people. And it just makes sense. The more information that we're learning about how simple carbohydrates affect our health negatively, it would make sense that then the food that we make from animals that are fed those simple carbohydrates, but aren't natural in their diet, would then change that and be negative for us too. But the government and the industry, I don't think, really wants to address that. And they'll say, oh, there's no study that shows there's anything negative about that. Well, who's going to pay for that study? The NIH is not going to give you money to fund you some study that's going to blow up the dairy industry. Again, I'm showing you to go from 10 and a half gallons to 2, 3 gallons. That's very disruptive in an industry. And so a lot of times I think they want a soft landing. So let's ease into people knowing that and let's wean ourselves slowly off a grain-fed diet. But we can't do that right now. And so they're not going to fund any study, and the industry's not going to fund any study about that. So where is that money going to come from? Nowhere. So it's easy for them to discount it. But now in selling, and I had no idea, I wasn't looking for this outcome because I don't feed any grain. So many people come back to me and they're astonished. And a lot of times where I hear it, and I know this is where I believe it's true and not biased by anecdotal evidence here, but the story that really leads me to think it's true is a wife will buy it, come back the next week and perplexed, say, why can my husband drink your milk and can't drink any other milk I buy? And so the husband, I never met the husband. The husband has no placebo effect from me to where he gets all warm and fuzzy and feels good about it. And that makes him feel better about drinking it. She's taken him home several different types of milk, and this one he responds differently to, and also selling raw and selling pasteurized. So I see it across both. The one common denominator there is the lack of grain. It's the same milk. And those cows aren't getting fed grain. One's raw, one's not. And that feedback, I'm coming back, again from that wife generally telling me that the one thing I think in the common denominator is lack of grain. And so it makes sense again with the information that we're finding about lots of sugars in our diets, and ground up corn is basically a sugar, and very easily digested in cows, and it measurably changes the milk. The biggest thing you'll see is it drops the percent of fat in the milk dramatically, and so that's the one benefit. You get my glass of milk is a much creamier taste, because my cows average around 5+% fat, whereas most U.S. dairies are averaging. Genetically, they've gotten better. It used to be 3.2, 3.5. Now you've got cows, Holsteins, that are 4% plus, with good genetics, good diets. But I'm still a plus percentage point plus over that, from that. But then there are other fatty acid components, and I think components that we've never even measured and documented that affect digestibility and inflammation. And I think, I don't really notice it. I can go and buy a jug of milk from King Soopers and drink it, and it tastes, it doesn't taste as good as mine because it doesn't have the fat and other things, but my stomach doesn't get all out of whack from it, but I've got an iron gut. But I think the people that do report back to me that, they're sensitive and they can only drink my milk, I think they're the canaries in the coal mine. Like, because I don't notice it doesn't mean it's not affecting me. I just don't notice it. I think it's affecting me. I think these people are the sentinels that really are telling us that there's a problem. So I think overall it'd be better for the country and our health if we fed less, concentrate, whether, most of it, the energy you get is ground corn. But there's soybean meal, there's millet, there's wheat, there's other things that give you that jolt of more energy. It's just corn's it's cheaper at doing that. So, and it's only, we've been around and existing in a symbiotic relationship with cows for, thousands of years. And it's only been the last 100 that we've been feeding them this way. We put the US, the Netherlands, the UK, I think France was a little bit of that, then Canada in the early 1900s, when we were pumping money into land grant universities, a lot of dairy, mainly departments, were pumped with the directive of how do we figure out how we see now that we get more milk, anecdotally out there from feeding grain. Let's figure out rations and specific rations that don't completely screw up these cows, because you really push them to the edge feeding them this grain because it's not natural. But we just did a lot of research and then pumped that research out with our extension agents, and we made a lot more milk. And at that time, I mean, think we're coming out of the Depression, and, people making food cheap, a lot of food cheap was important to keeping people alive. So I don't, I hate talking negatively about those researchers and people in government, that were pumping taxpayer dollars into that, because at the time I think it was the right thing to do. But we're much different society and economy and culture now. We don't need to make as much food as cheap as we can, and discounting health and how it affects our bodies. But I think, now it just makes people so much money. I had dairies that I did work with that had 2 Lear jets. You have to have 4 pilots on staff, and not, let alone the Lear jets and keeping them up. But you've got 4 pilots on staff. It's like you got to be making a lot of milk, to have that just to fly around and look at your holdings. So at the very top, and then the processors on top of that make a lot of money, and the ancillary industries, veterinarians, nutritionists, semen salesmen, commodity brokers, everybody, people who selling paper towels make a lot of money, and they're not going to be out there trashing those people. So when you sit next to them on an airplane and they tell you what they do, and you ask about the dairy industry, they're going to tell you everything's fine and everything's great, and they take care of cows perfectly, because they're kind of the first shield, I think, in protecting this image that the dairy industry has done so well at marketing and portraying. Think back to Got Milk and California Happy Cow, and all that stuff is really just misled the public. So I mentioned earlier, my parents divorced, and my mom was a city and my dad was a country. So I felt comfortable in both worlds. And it was from interacting with my city friends and mainly their wives, and seeing a lot of them stop eating dairy, because they knew that the welfare practices were horrible, and these were the minority of people. But it's like these people are out there and they're informed, and the people that are informed, they're not buying this BS, and they're giving up dairy, which they love, because they know they can't trust you. And it's like, that's foolish. Why can't we give them an option here? The industry is so take it or leave it. We know what we're doing, and don't tell us what to do. What industry survives doing that to their customer? And there's a lot of antagonism, and I think, rightfully so. Sometimes country people get pissed that city people think they're stupid and take them for granted, and there's some of that, but they think a lot of negative things about city people that aren't really founded. From growing up in the city, it was like, well, no, they're not bad people, and they're not all idiots. They're just ignorant to what you do. And if you educate them, if you took a second to inform them, they might not think these stupid things that you think they think. So I think, that's, I saw an opportunity there that wasn't being filled, but it's a hunch. There was nobody out there. My whole life had been around the dairy industry as a producer, as a veterinarian, as a consultant around the world, and I'd never seen a dairy that. So the one thing I wanted to do was leave the calves with their mothers. That's the big kind of foundation for us that separates us apart from other dairies, because there's no way you can do that. So feeding grain is one thing you have to do within the dairy industry, and taking the calves away from their mothers right away so that you can harvest all that milk. And it's just easier to manage thousands of cows, to have little babies running around as you're trying to push them to the parlor complicates things. And so they want to be as efficient as possible. So getting those little young ones out of there and separated and feeding them lower quality milk replacer makes them a lot more money. And so, um, in talking with city people and people that are informed, that was one recurring theme I kept hearing that bothered him was, I don't like them removing the calves from their mother. So I had to do that and start that by myself. And in vet school, they don't teach you anything about that. They teach you two sentences about it. Basically, it's horrible. Don't do it. All the calves are gonna die of diarrhea. They're gonna get scours being around all these adult cows, and they're all gonna die of diarrhea. And the calves are gonna be contaminated, and they're gonna be nursing their mothers and contaminating all their teats and giving them mastitis. So it's gonna be a double whammy on you. Don't ever do it. And so I was a little scared to put up a banner that, hey, I'm doing better welfare, and then I've got this train wreck behind me. So the first couple of years I did it, I didn't sell direct. I fed my milk to calves that I would buy and then market those calves later, and to really see whether it worked or not. And I found that it worked better than anything I'd ever seen. It really blew me away how the calves did. I'd never seen calves respond. I had to relearn kind of cues. It was like, oh, that calf's got some scours. I'm going to need to treat tomorrow and do this. And tomorrow it's not progressing the way you'd always seen it, as a veterinarian or a producer. And it's just a direct result of being on their mother and having more and better quality milk. Um, and then figuring out the logistics of, in Colorado, raw milk is illegal, and so that really limits. They do all you are allowed to sell it, and I do now through a cow share, but that's just direct through the consumer. You can't sell it at a store, you can't sell it to a restaurant, you can't be at a farmer's market selling it, and so it really limits you. And so, and I started this downsized and wanted to process and sell direct to not only to make a living and be sane and do things the way that I thought, was right to do, but also to try to educate people. What I saw the biggest deterrent to change in the dairy industry is people have got their blinders on, and the dairy industry is very good at marketing and keeps people thinking that, oh, the cows are living beautiful, great lives. And, in training, it's interesting. Half the people that would come to train with me were beef cow producers. So they had no association with dairy. Cows are cows. And so when you go to train them on repro, it's really much easier to train them on my dairy clients. Cause one, I had several thousand cows you could lock up every morning. And so I have access to get in different cows and look at different things with them. And dairy cows are always getting pregnant. So you've got pregnancies and lots of different cycles. So you can look at lots of different things. And so I would take these beef cow clients out to these dairies to train. And so some of them had never been on a dairy before, but, they've been around cows and they're not bunny huggers. They, know like what farm animals are, and they know animals go to get slaughtered. So it's not like they freak out about like, oh my God, you're doing horrible things to animals. But they would be on the dairy and be, is this normal? Like, y'all do this? And so a big thing that you find on dairies is lame cows. So dairies, since you're in the same spot, you have to come back to the milking parlor 3 times a day. Manure builds up, and you can't, if you got dirt, it just turns into slop. And to even come close to keeping it clean, it's just constant tractor man hours doing stuff. So the dairy industry switched to just putting things on concrete and easier to scrape or flush. And so boom, 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 you're clean in an instant. But cows aren't meant to live on concrete. And so having them on concrete 24/7 creates a lot of lameness issues. They get a lot of sole ulcers, they get a lot of joint issues. And so you've got a lot of cows that are either mildly lame or 3-legged lame, where they're just kind of hopping around. And so as you're walking around to different pens and accessing cows to train, you're walking by cows that are lame. And if you're on a dairy, you kind of get what Temple Ground is, a famous animal welfarist at CSU, who's also famous for being autistic and opening up a lot of light about teaching autistic kids. But she revolutionized the slaughter industry and cattle. And in the cattle industry, talks it about the abnormal becomes normal. So after you start seeing, even though like the first time you're shocked, but after you see it a number of times, it becomes normal to you. You're no longer shocked about it. And that's what the dairy industry is. But you have these people that would, be shadowing you in your training that would say, what's going on here? And it makes you aware. It's like, damn it. Why am I okay with this? Why am I blind to this? And so it just kept little Chinese water torture to me to like, don't accept this. Don't. And what most veterinarians do, most of my colleagues, they'll ignore it. You'll get them drunk at a conference and they'll open up. I know, but I've got a wife and kids at home, and what am I supposed to do? And so what most of them do, you find a progression. They chew up the new associates. So the veterinarian graduates vet school, goes into a practice, and gets thrown to the wolves. And 90% of them leave and go into ancillary industries. So you work for Pfizer, is now Zoetis in the animal industry, or Merck or Marielle, or you go work for the semen companies, or you go work for the new IVF repro companies as their salesman or their troubleshooter, but you're never touching the cows really. And so it's easy. You buzz into a new dairy, you fly somewhere in Arizona, and you buzz into the office, you sit and talk for a few minutes. You might drive around in the cab of a truck and look at some cows, but you're never out there confronted with the brutal, the reality of the farm. And it's interesting. I came from Virginia and I moved to Colorado in the mid '90s and took over. I was managing herdsmen on a couple big dairies here, and it was my first experience working with illegal immigrant labor in the early '90s, mid '90s. It was commonplace in the West. So Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, California, had many years with illegal immigrants, but that wave hadn't spread to the rest of the country. You'd get summer vegetable workers that would come through parts of the Southeast, but they would come in and they leave. Nobody stayed like the dairy workers. And so, when I first moved out here was my first experience with them, and everybody, talks about the cheaper wages, as the reason that dairies are hiring them. And that was a big thing back then. No longer really the case because they're not numbers anymore. But back then, a big dairy, 10 to 20 guys would show up and they all had experience and they were looking for work. And so you could pay them nothing and they'd work. And not that I did it, but the dairies that I worked for did it. And every dairy did it. And I saw that, and it was a real thing, and it's a bad thing for everybody involved. But everybody thinks it's just money, and money's a big part of it. But after working on these dairies for so long, what I realized is half of the reason that they're employing illegal immigrants is these people come from countries where people aren't treated, very well at all. And so you kind of get blind to seeing animal welfare issues where it's like, where I came from, like, people weren't even treated, as good as this. So how can I see this? And where I found it was hard for dairies that tried employing American-born, white people, black people, Hispanics, they would never stay because of that brutal reality. Like, God, this is just horrible. I can't handle this, and they're gone. And so you kind of gravitate toward mostly illegal immigrants because they're the only people that really can handle sticking around, not only from a pay standpoint, but just seeing just cows chewed up.
I think it would be nice to try some of your milk right now.
Yeah, before it gets too warm.
Yeah.
You want to pull some out? So I brought in, I didn't know if you wanted to. So I got some chocolate, which is real sought after. And I've got some of my regular milk. I've got raw and I've got my pasteurized. I didn't know if you wanted to try the difference.
I would love to try the difference and get the have you share. Now I've bought all of your products many times. I've never had your raw milk because I haven't been a part of your what do you call it? Like a cow share?
Yeah. And if I don't charge you, I can give it to you for free. So it's legal for us to drink it, here. So there's no problem with that.
Oh, great.
So.
And I do drink raw milk just as of recently. My girlfriend is a member at Golden Hoof.
Okay.
And so we get raw milk from there. And I'd never tried raw milk up until maybe 2 months ago. And I find it to be so hydrating.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? I'm like, why does this feel so hydrating?
Yeah.
And maybe get into some of the benefits of like staying on like first like the positive side of it, because there's so much we could go into, like where this industry is a mess. Why is milk important? What did that evolving with the cow look like? And how is this helpful for us when it's really good?
Yeah, I mean, I believe milk is still considered the only food source that you can survive on solely for maximum amount of time. It's got the most nutrients you need, along with micronutrients that check all the boxes for you. So as far as like packed with what you need to survive, that's something that we found, our ancestors found a long time ago. This is pretty good stuff, and it makes it easier for us to keep babies alive and grow kids strong. And then, studies have found that, and not to discount, a vegan diet. I think a vegan diet, can be done right and can grow kids, healthy and strong. But I think it takes paying attention to everything precisely, and you got to do everything just right. Whereas I think milk, you can be a pretty dumb parent nutritionally and grow a pretty strong maximal body high IQ child with with a milk diet. So I feel strongly. I mean, I grew up drinking a lot of milk and
Same.
eating a lot of dairy products. So,
Same.
and it's funny when when everybody and whenever just you see a couple will come by and the a guy will be like 6'8", 6'10", 300, just a NFL defensive lineman. If you ask any of them, I bet you drank and ate a lot of dairy growing up. There's not one of them that says like, "Oh no, I didn't eat any dairy." Like dairy is a big part of growing a big body. Like you need a lot of nutrients. And it's so a big thing also people get confused about that I like to remind people of is um, people talk protein, which dairy is, an awesome source of protein. Protein's not protein's not protein. You got to talk about the bioavailability of that protein. So the amino acid component of that protein, we have 10 essential amino acids as humans that we need. And cows are mammals and they have similar, essential amino acids to us. And so the things that in the milk that they provide is very similar to what, a baby of ours needs. And so those proteins are extremely bioavailable to us. 99 plus percent meat and milk are for us, whereas beans and some other things are in the 60s. So,
Higher if they're sprouted, but if they're not sprouted, yeah.
right,
I think it's a lot of people don't. That's a big thing. People don't realize is they're like, oh, I'm gonna have this pea protein shake that's saying I'm gonna get 20 grams of
right,
protein. It's like, well, bioavailability. How much of that 20 grams can your body actually
yes.
consume? Maybe less than maybe 5.
Right, right, exactly, and that's where I say, like, protein's not protein. If you look at a label and it says X grams of protein, that doesn't mean, like you're saying, that your body's getting X grams of protein to utilize, so but in, dairy and meat, that almost 100% of that does,
That
so
10 or that 20 that's being advertised on
right,
the milk, you're getting all 20.
right.
Where the pea protein, especially if not sprouted, maybe a quarter of it.
Right, right.
Hmm.
And that's what I'm saying. It's there and you can do it. It's just you got to do your math a little differently and you just got to pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas, dairy's a little more, fail proof, it's just dummy proof kind of just drink it and you're going to get it, unless the industry has messed up a few things with it that I think affect that quality and just dumminess of it. One, it's less fat that we've got right off the bat from feeding that grain. So you're reducing calories there.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I just tried both of the milks. This was the pasteurized and this is the non-pasteurized.
Mhm.
And I think in my mind, I'm like, I just want to like the non-pasteurized so much more. I want to be like that team on that. Like, hey, I'm brand new. I'm 39 and I never even tried non-pasteurized milk until, what do you call it?
Raw.
Raw milk. I never tried raw milk until 2 months ago. So um, to to me, it felt, and I think there's some bias in me, but like smoother, creamier. I mean, they're both very easy to drink. What type of feedback do you get from people on, comparing the two?
I don't have a lot of customers that bounce back and forth. People are either very committed to one side or the other. I can tell, like, if so, both those milks will separate. Neither one is homogenized. So pasteurization is heating. And by law, the FDA, the minimum is 145 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. That's the minimum to be considered pasteurized according to the FDA. So the FDA has a Bible that they update every few years called the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance, the PMO, that we all have to live by. And that's what every state then applies those rules set by the FDA and the PMO. So when the state of Colorado inspects my milk plant and samples my products um,
Every month.
every month they sample all my products for testing for bacteria levels, for antibiotics, for other contaminants, and temperature, and so just overall quality that to make sure that it's a good thing that the public, is protected from stuff that can make you sick potentially. It's not foolproof, they're not testing every product of mine, but spot checking, once a month keeps you on your toes and things kind of slowly build up problems generally as far as contamination issues, which is mostly what you're worried about as far as what they come out to inspect and stuff. So as long as they're kind of checking every now and then, they're finding, any contamination that might be becoming a problem. So it's 145 degrees for 30 minutes is what they said. So raw, is none of that homogenization where is separate than the pasteurization, and that's forcing the fat through little tiny holes, and it basically chops the fat particles up into smaller bits, and then it keeps the fat in suspension. So cows' fat globule is very long, and it tends to then agglutinate and separate out from the solution and rise to the top, and that's why you needed to shake that milk, both those before you drank it. But the store you buy in the milk, all that's homogenized, and those fat particles have been broken up and they stay in solution, so they don't rise to the top. So there's no mandate that you do that. FDA does not say you have to do that. There's
Oh,
nothing about
nice.
that. You don't have to homogenize at all. And that's why I don't do it. I'm not forced to, and I think the quality is better. But the reason they do it is when that cream rises to the top, if that cream really the fat really sets up and starts to harden and set up, it oxidizes with the air at the top of that bottle, and it creates a smell, an off smell, long before the milk goes bad. But, the first thing when you open that bottle, you're gonna get a whiff of that oxidized smell, and the dairy industry doesn't want the negativity of that and the aversion of future buying from that, and so the way to avoid that is never have the fat consolidate at the top and oxidize with the air. If it stays in solution, it never oxidizes. So for mine, it's not really a problem because I'm selling milk so fresh and it's moving around. I put it in a cooler, then I'm throwing it on its side before I hand it to somebody to market. I throw a label on it, and that fat gets remixed in, and it never really sets up really hard there. And so it never really oxidizes well. But in the dairy industry, stuff stays on a conveyor belt, goes right in a milk crate, goes right on a pallet, goes right with a forklift into a warehouse, gets lifted into the truck. And so it never really gets mixed up, and it can stay upright for many days. And that fat, cream top can really build up and harden and really oxidize and create that smell. So I think it's like, let's don't even deal with that mess. Let's homogenize everything. And then I've also found since I started separating cream and selling it, is I thought they just homogenized for the stuff for milk to keep it from rising to the top of the milk, but I didn't think they did it for everything. But so the minute every milk that comes in, so as I mentioned, as a dairy farmer, the tanker truck from the co-op comes, picks up your milk, and then it's generally already been sold and diverted. They've got to supply this creamery somewhere, and the truck drives there and then drops it off there. And so when that milk comes into a creamery, the first thing they do is separate off the cream and get it off from the liquid portion. And then they homogenize all of it. And then some gets bottled for heavy cream. Well, then they'll mix in some gums and stuff with that, and then it gets bottled. And then whatever is going for milk, then they'll add in the 1%, 2%, 3.25 for whole. But I thought they only did that for the milk. But as I mentioned, they do it for the cream, and I've since found out why. So the heavy cream, if you don't homogenize it and break it up in the smaller molecules, it's more sensitive to cold, and it can kind of congeal if it gets below like 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I'll throw it in coolers, and over the course of the wintertime, it's gotten exposed to those lower temperatures, and then it really sets up, and then you can't pour it. And, you can scoop it out and it works the same in whatever dish you're doing it. But, that's unnerving for somebody that wants to pour their cream in their coffee. And so the industry, again, is just like, well, let's don't even deal with it. Let's break it up and do that. But to make, so you separate off the skim milk when you separate, and then you've got the cream, and then you can make butter from that cream. And so when you're selling that, you end up with, say you got 100 gallons of milk and you separate off the cream. you'll have about 85 pints of heavy cream. So you're already kind of going down from your gallons, thinking about price per gallon I need. All right, now I've got, all right, I started with 100 gallons. Now I only got 85 of these pints to sell. So I'm gonna have to sell it for more than what I was selling my gallons for, because I've got less of these to sell if I want that same price per gallon. And milk's my lowest revenue product and makes me very little money. But everybody's got bread, eggs, and milk are the three things that news programs put up as related to inflation. So yogurt and ricotta, they don't really have a firm price in their head. So milk, I'm pretty close to what my break even is. So I can't really go lower than that. So when I started separating, I really didn't have an outlet for my skim milk or any skim products. So I had to make money from all that. And so the cream, I'm having to charge $15 for a pint. You can buy a pint for $3, in a store. The most expensive cream is like $6 or so a pint, I think. So 15 is like outrageous. And I was thinking, well, nobody's going to buy that. But people started buying it and trying it and were just blown away by the taste. And again, I think it comes back to you can't buy cream that's not homogenized and chopped up. And then they add gums to it and other stuff. And I don't add any of that. And it's also ultra pasteurized to make sure it lasts forever because it's so expensive. They don't want it to go bad. And all the three of those things don't make the quality. They don't make it better for the customer. They make it better for the processor to make more money and extend the shelf life on it. And the same with like the ricotta that you like so much of mine that unfortunately they're bottling packaging right now, so I didn't have any to bring.
No worries, but I'll let the people know that the ricotta is world class.
Well,
Hmm.
I make it from my milk, and the industry, all the ricotta you buy in the store, they make from whey. So they make a cheese, and that liquid portion they acidify and shock out the remaining fat and protein that's in there, which isn't very much. And so that's a whole different beast. And in Italian, they call it differently. So my ricotta, they call ricotta di leche, and the ricotta they make from cheese is just ricotta. So they're very persistent about like, no, that is different, because they do taste so different. But the one big thing, that's my shortest shelf life product. So when I make that ricotta, it lasts about 2.5+ weeks from when I make it. And that's my shortest shelf life. Everything you buy in the store, they spray with ascorbic acid to extend the shelf life well beyond that, and again, that's not to make it taste better for you. That's to make the processor get 3, 4 plus more weeks of shelf life on that product, and so many things are done from the way they feed cows to get so much more milk that then drops the fat and it changes the fatty acid composition of milk and other components that affect how it tastes in your palate. And then the way they process it, so many things that they do are not, again, to make it taste better for you or make your food taste better that you make with it. Is to make them more money and squeeze out even more pennies out of that gallon than they were previously. And that just it doesn't seem like a good relationship. Like, and that's why, again, I think when you go to Europe and people report like, "Oh, the food tastes so much better," the relationship in Europe is not that let's try to squeeze it out. Their focus, it seems like, how do we make the best tasting food? And then, all right, how do we figure out how to make it the cheapest, the best tasting? Not we don't want to sacrifice any quality, but let's try to save some money where we can. But here it's let's make it as cheap as we can, and then let's add some colors or add some gums or add stuff to trick a palate to make it think that it tastes good, but it's not. And I think that again reflects on our health and everything else.
What's coming up for me is just the energetics of your product, where you've got happy cows that are fed in a good way, they live a good life, and they're not living in some type of a hellscape like most cows do. A cow that lives in this hellish type world that's just anxious and can barely walk and is treated in such a bad way that no one even wants to work at the farm. How does that anxiety, that fear, that depression that's in the cow, because a cow can feel all those how does that transfer then into the milk and then into the human?
Yeah.
Can the human take on the anxiousness of the animal?
And you're touching on something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and that famous reproductive or the animal welfare that I mentioned up at CSU, Temple Grandin. a lot of their studies revolve around cortisol, and there's a lot of, studies showing, directly cortisol definitely goes up. But I think there are other factors that affect, quality of the milk and the cow's health too, that are reflected in the milk. But getting back to, again, who's gonna pay for those study to find, those small little proteins that nobody has ever really analyzed or done any work with? They're not gonna go looking for anything to support what you and I are thinking. They're gonna pay for studies that reinforce what we've already been told. I mean, look at the I'm sorry, I'm like, that goddamn food pyramid. I mean, I knew when I was a kid that thing was junk, when you looked at it, and they've stood behind that forever, and it's complete lies, and so that's the story. They don't wanna get off that because that sold more corn and grain. That has just been a big part of our ag focus since post World War II, and it makes, again, there's people at the top that are flying Lear jets and all the industry that's making a lot of money that supports them. They're not gonna give that up easily, and so, um, I you know, I you no matter what your opinion of Bobby Kennedy, I'm happy to see that. I think
I have a positive opinion.
I think to give it a little bit of change, at least to open up the door to some different research, to focus on some different things. And again, like reinforcing stuff, and the food pyramid is the worst example of it, is like, this is foolish. And we've wasted a lot of money on this. Like, yes, I think we should divert some money to something else, or at least studying how these things could have potentially been harmful to us. I mean, it's nuts to know. What the most recent one had, like, chocolate, Lucky Charms
Yeah.
was the better choice than like an egg or like a yogurt or something. It's like, come on, you've lost your effing mind if you can't step back
Well,
from
luckily, when you go that far, people have to see where
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
you're lying to us. This is crazy.
Right.
Candy is better for me than an egg. Like, okay, it's
Right.
just,
Right.
you've lost me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I think, I think generationally, the boomers have been more supportive of that type of traditional stuff, and I think us Xers are a little more open to, yeah, let's do something different. Like, this obviously isn't working too well, and let's try something else, or let's at least look at trying something else. And I think millennials and Zs seem to be more that way. Let's really rock the boat a little bit and test some new waters. And I tell people, like, as horrible as I think the industry is in so many ways, like, I don't want to see it blown up tomorrow, because it does supply a lot of quality protein and fat and, energy that the community needs, and there's no replacement for that. If we just say end all of them tomorrow, there's no replacement for that. Like, we do have to kind of wean ourselves off of them, and I think we should, but we have to be smart about it. That they are supplying something that society desperately needs and needs every day, and we don't have a good replacement for that volume of. I mean, some of these dairies, I was consulting with, would milk 30,000 cows in one location. Those tanker trucks, they're going in every 30 minutes, filling up those tanker trucks of those. I mean, and thinking about replacing that amount of fat and protein and just energy and nutrition that supplies to society, you can't take lightly. And so while they're doing some things, and especially around welfare, that definitely need improvement, they're meeting some high value needs in society that I think, we should recognize and not, completely poo poo that. And a lot of these farmers, and I don't want to, bash, the farmers that I've been a part of my whole life, because I think a lot of them, some of them I come across, are evil people and care nothing about cows or people, and it's all about power and money. But a lot of them are good people that, or it's a bad industry. The commodity market is soulless, and unless you play by its rules, which have no rules, is just make more of this cheaper, you don't survive. And when you've got, like I said, ancillary industry people put the blinders up and play along because I got kids, I got a family. Like if I draw a line, I got no alternative to this. And it's so small an industry that I've found, if you go up against it, you're blacklisted from everything. You can't get work, anything
Have you
associated.
been black?
Oh, not that I've looked, but I've been threatened enough by the milk mafia that I know I couldn't go back, and it's a good thing I don't want to go back. So I'm glad I burned the bridges when I left.
Because you're speaking so openly here, and I'm in such appreciation for it. And I think people really need to hear this and understand this. That I wonder what type of blowback you're concerned of. It
We'll
seems like
see.
none.
I think up till now that they don't really care about me that much. That my voice has been pretty small. I've been working so hard, so focused on growing the business and the name recognition for the business to then have a platform to then be able to educate people has consumed much of my energy that I haven't had so much energy to focus on, rocking the boat too much. And so I think they probably discount me right now and don't care what I say. But when I turned my back on them, it was in COVID. And I posted some negative tweets back then related to them. I got some emails from very prominent big dairy producers, with a soft threaten of you better watch, what you're doing, and your whole career has gotten to where you are because of us supporting you, and you owe it to us. And again, I didn't devote my life to being a veterinarian and being in the dairy industry for the people that own the cows. I did it for the cows. And so
Yeah.
the people were a part of that, but only if they were on board and making the cow's life as good as possible. And I didn't feel like I had that relationship at all at the end. And so I have, no loyalty or
Of course.
anything to them to support them and shield them anyway. But that's again where a lot of people are ignorant. And it was funny. Another thing that really opened my eyes, the dairy industry organizations start up all the time. So one of the older ones, Dairy Science Association, American Dairy Science Association, has a conference like every, Denver will have it hosted every few years. They'll rotate through that. It's a big conference hall. Thousands of people come and different things. So the new ones start all the time. They try to generate, people have ideas and want to start one up. And one that got started that's still thriving relatively is one related to welfare around dairy cows. And I remember one year in Phoenix, there was a conference there I went, and they had around forum. They'd pay people. They'd go out in front of the hotel or wherever and ask people, will you come in and answer some questions for us and sit up in front of these people and we'll pay you $100 or whatever. And they had about 5 or 6 people come in. They had no association with our group or veterinarians or the dairy industry or anything. And we just posed questions to them. And I remember one year in Phoenix, and this was like in June. It was end of May, beginning of June. So, it was hot as hell in Phoenix. I remember this one woman up on the stage was saying that all the cows she saw as she drove around, she thought were dairy cows. It was like, out on pastures like nothing. It was like, you think dairy cows are out in the 120-degree sun, like, you just have no idea of like their life, what they're doing. Like there are a lot of cows in Arizona, but they're all on concrete under roof with misters on them and fans, which is great. They need to be taken care of, but they have to lead very artificial lives, to be able to produce milk. And it's not because so much those farmers feel all warm and fuzzy. No, a lot of them do and don't want to hurt their cows. But the main reason you have all those farms having misters and fans is you make so much more milk. You can't make any milk in that oppressive heat, and you need to be. Dairies historically have always been close to city centers because to truck milk around is very expensive. So you wanted to be close and have your creameries close to, so you have, and that's where the people that control the dairy industry and some of the people that I think are evil, that I hate within the dairy industry, that are some of the main drivers of the dairy industry, are descendants of Dutch immigrants that started in Chino, California, outside of LA. And as LA grew, they bought these dairies just for real estate by the square foot. And so these dairymen in the 70s made many, many millions of dollars that then they parlayed into buying farms in the Central Valley. So they bought farms, much bigger farms and more water, places from in between Sacramento and Bakersfield, and they set their sons up there. And now it's the grandsons they're setting up. So as I mentioned, Leprino has that plant in Greeley that only got built 15 years ago, and so all those cows had to come from somewhere else. And so it was the grandsons that they moved cows and set up new dairies or took over old dairies and then expanded them hugely to have the grandsons milking out here. And so you've got these, very small families that have just taken advantage of it. It wasn't that necessarily they were better dairymen. They just land opportunities and being right outside of the biggest real estate blow up we had over the last, probably 100 years in the US, and they were the benefactors of it, having water and lots of land. They had all the crops, they had, all that they to support the dairy. So they had thousands of acres with all the water for that to build the subdivisions in. So they made tons of money back then.
So you brought up Bobby Kennedy, and if he were to call you up and say, "Hey, Kevin, advise me on what are the first three things, actions you think I should take towards or within the dairy industry."
Well, so if Bobby Kennedy was calling me and, his human health services there, and more related to the human health, and not focusing on the cow side so much, so focusing on the food and how it interacts with people, is I would focus on, high grain feeding we're doing and how, and so what different factors or what fatty acid composition is contributing to the reaction, the inflammation, the sensitivity that people are having in digesting this. They've screened milk, and maybe they haven't screened milk so well that doesn't come from cows, that because it's rare to find milk that comes from cows that aren't fed grain, to maybe notice the difference. But there's so much work done on cows that I'm sure they've isolated every protein in milk, but maybe haven't studied exactly what each protein does, and exactly is and how it interacts with our body. And so that's probably where more, NIH money could be directed and focused on composition of milk and how it interacts with the digestive system and creating some of these sensitivities that I'm finding anecdotally and, on a repetitive basis. And again, kind of blinded where I'm not meeting this person that's reporting back that they're, reacting differently to my milk. So it leads me to think that this is more than just a placebo effect or, researcher bias kind of thing. But, as I mentioned, I did a master's and I worked all through, and pretty much all my university career, I worked research dairies or in research settings. And so I know research and I know statistics and I know bias. And so I'm always cautious of, am I trying to see, too much into this? And so I try to look at many different factors. And again, that two-step kind of like I've never met this person, and again, it's repeatable, and across both raw and pasteurized. And that's what I think a lot of the benefits people talk with raw milk, and then there are benefits and above pasteurized. But I think some of the benefits people ascribe to raw milk, I think are come from lack of grain. So a lot of raw milk dairies, they'll feed a little grain, but they won't feed 25 pounds of grain. And so I think it's probably on a depreciating scale of that kind of inflammatory factors in the milk. At 25 pounds of grain a day, you're probably getting a whole lot more than if your cow's getting 1 or 2 or 3 pounds of grain a day, which is what you find on a lot of, raw milk dairies. They'll just throw them a little bit. And that even that little bit will boost a lot of milk. And so, it's definitely makes people money. And I used to do that when I first started selling, but I started getting feedback from people around digestion and talking to other people that made me think, I think this might be related to grain. And then about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I cut it out completely. And that's when the responses really seemed to come back at a much greater kind of scale when I went completely off grain, but it really limited the amount of milk.
This podcast is brought to you by B Micro, a company I'm deeply passionate about because I founded it in 2018. It's USDA organic freeze-dried microgreens for everyday nutrition and detox. Sprinkle them on any meal or take them as a capsule to enjoy the many healthy benefits. Shop now at bmicro.farm. Use code STEVE15 to save. So number one would be to do some research around what's in this milk, pasteurized versus raw, versus just different ways of seeing what's in the milk.
Yes.
What else would you advise him with?
Well, so, I think those are indirect effects from feeding grain to the cow, and then that changes the milk comes. But also, we're sticking things in milk, like, all the heavy creams have gums added to it. You can't find, really heavy cream without stuff, and all the different preservatives that are added. I don't know that we've really done too many studies. I mean, they say ascorbic acid is fine for us to eat, but is it all right for us to eat at a routine basis? I don't know that we've done really much studies on that. If you look at, I don't know if you ever follow a podcaster that I follow a lot is Brett Weinstein.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's genius.
Genius.
Yeah.
And when he was, I think it was his PhD, he was studying the mice that are all used, and it's the same colony that's bred, and it's the same colony forever that is used in FDA clinical trials on, is it safe for humans? First, they feed it to rats and see, well, all these rats have very different telomere lengths than we have as humans, or healthy humans have, and so
which are like the ends of your DNA.
yeah, ends of your DNA, and like how quickly kind of you can kind of repair yourself, and so repairing tissue is really good. At tissue repair, but you run the line of then you're really good at making cancers. So cell division and growing cells really well helps at sealing up and repairing tissue, but it also, if you get out of whack and uncontrolled, that's cancer for you too. And so we've got, if we're looking for, does this cause cancer, does this not, we haven't got a rat population that represents the human population. And that's what his PhD brought up, and was like, hey, this might be confounding, some of the decisions we're making about all the things we're consuming and doing and injecting in our bodies. We're making wrong decisions here. And it was, don't worry about that, and pushed under the rug. And they've never really challenged that ever again. And so, all the things that we say, the FDA says this is fine, it's like, is it? They told us Agent Orange was fine too, and so to think that, and we see now the revolving door, and I was a part of a lot of clinical trials and leading up to clinical trials with my contract research with reproductive drugs and counting. Anytime you're injecting a drug in a food animal, that all has to go through the FDA at the highest, strictest levels of security. You don't want anything unknown than getting in the milk or getting in the meat that gets in the food chain. And so they're very strict about that. And I've been a part of I've been aboard the scientific advisory board on all these companies that when we're designing studies. And so I see how the FDA is. And then you also see the revolving door of, wait a minute, the guy was just at the FDA, is now head of Pfizer, and now, is like, I don't think you're really necessarily holding them to the highest standards that you held us to, because we were some podunk little company that meant nothing to you. But I guarantee you, I saw what you did here with this bigger company, and that wasn't the same way you treated me. So that leads me to think that maybe we're not getting the best data and making the best decisions on what is okay for us. And so I think revisiting some of those things, because there's no doubt. I mean, I think my lifetime has been the trajectory of it, of just American health and body going to shit. I mean, just look at a picture from the beach, in the 70s versus now, and you'd think you were in a completely different world, and that isn't just, just off of I think there's a lot to that, but I think the biggest part of it was all wrapped up in our food, but there's a lot of different factors affecting our food that made it into such frankenfood that, not only is bad chemically for us, but now they've, like cigarettes, figured us out, where we just can't resist. The middle of that grocery store, all that crap food, people just can't resist gorging on. And that, has been companies and studies and tuning us in, and not just by chance they got there. So I think there's a lot we need to step back and look at the bigger picture and revisit some of these things that we've just taken for granted that, oh, it's fine.
Yeah, and thinking that the government has our back on it all.
Right.
Like, oh, if Big Daddy government says it's okay, then it's okay.
Right.
And that certainly isn't true.
And that's where I find with labels, that people believe the government and organic and different stuff. And now I find at the farmer's market, because I'm not certified organic, and I thought that might be an issue, is not an issue at all. That people are looking for eyeballs to look and have a conversation with, and they know I'll probably come closer to the truth talking with you and come and visit in your farm than I will at some label that tells me grass-fed or organic or something, because it's pretty easy for these people to lie, and they lie a lot about what they do. And again, they never. I find a lot of these producers, the big ones that really produce a lot of milk, are so far removed from the average person, and they're shielded again by the ancillary industry and vendors that kind of yeah, portray an image for them without having to interact with anybody in society. And so I don't think they don't really know to care what people want, and it's just let's just and all they are getting pats on the back is if they make more money. So let's just focus on making more money, doing this cheaper, and that's what I seem to get the most praise and gives me the most power. So let's do more and more of this, and it hasn't been. And one of the thing that, and this is really if it gets out, and this is the thing that really, I think, pushed me over the edge as far as opening my eyes to how bad this industry is and how much is protected by ancillary industry is. So DFA, the world's largest cooperative, Dairy Farmers of America, and that's here in Colorado, and who I used to sell my milk to when I was selling into the commodity market. So they implemented a third party welfare auditing program called the FARM program. It stands for something, but FARM, farm. And I actually got trained as an auditor. So um, the third party auditing group who set up this, they've got a bunch of different ones for feedlots, for chickens, for slaughter plants, when they started one for dairy. And so then they needed to create certification for that. And so then they created that and created classes. And I was one of the first ones to go. And so I got a couple gigs going out and auditing for Nestle at some dairies in California. And I was really kind of in the know of this program, and was also selling at the time in the co-op. And the co-op, this was when it started to come on, and they got very aggressive in their marketing and saying that by, I believe it was 2017 or 2016, that every dairy, all the dairies that were selling to the DFA, and it's the world's largest and nation's largest cost, so there's gonna be a lot of cows, a lot of dairies, had to be audited by this welfare program. And we were ending that time they were allowing tail docking before, and we ended tail docking, and so we're really focusing on welfare. And so I was thinking, well, this is good, there's third party, and I was still thinking this third party was truly third party. Well, again, I started selling, and part of their auditing program was you have to be audited every 2 years. And I sold for 4 years in this program. And I had dairies that I was, as a veterinarian, still servicing. I had multiple dairies. And none of those dairies, and myself included, were ever audited in the course of those 4 years. So you're directly lying to people, telling you you're doing this and you're not doing it. And then when I found out they would do some audits, but it was of, the few dairies and good dairies that they knew would pass an audit. And then they would go and seek out becoming a certified auditor. I wouldn't get very many calls from people. And then when I did get called from Nestle to go out, and it was actually one dairy in Idaho, and the co-op sent out their representative to shadow me to make sure that, I didn't find anything. I think that brought too much negativity to them. And so talking with this guy, he was part of DFA and had to also get audited by the farm program. So Nestle wanted a separate auditor, and it was good on Nestle. It was like, we don't really trust this one. We want our own to come in. So they contracted with me. And so I came in and talking with him. He's like, oh, yeah, we get this one veterinarian from Kansas. And it was like talking to other people, oh, this guy from Kansas. So you get one auditor that's just writes whatever you want him to write. It's like, oh, you're doing everything fine. You're okay. They weren't doing all the dairies. The few dairies that they were doing, they were hand picking. They were the best dairies. And then they were hand picking the auditor that they want. So it was like, how is this truly a third party system coming in there and making sure that you guys aren't screwing things up? And so I was appalled at this, and I thought so the farm program has executives, and they're skimming money off all these things to pay for this, and they've got executives, they're people on salary making lots of money. They go to all these conferences to talk it up, and you as veterinarians need to be a part of this, and it's such a good thing for the industry. Well, I caught one of their main executives who was talking about it at one of these conferences, a veterinary conference in Arizona. And she acted surprised and, oh my goodness, I didn't know that they weren't doing all their dairies every 2 years. And, oh, we're going to look into this. Nothing happened.
Of course.
Why even do this? I mean, why go through this whole effing charade? And again, it's just to put up a facade and to portray a completely different image than what actually exists. But it was like, this is direct lying to people. I mean, it's not just fudging around, and there are some dairymen that are doing good, and so you can say that your marketing campaign reflected these guys. Across the board, this whole industry, you're lying as a whole cooperative to all your consumers, and that I just felt was beyond the board, and I couldn't be a part of that, and it just was the final push for me. It was like, I'm done, and I don't want to be a part of anything related to this industry and helping this. And so that was the final push to to sell, my market, process, sell direct, and do everything that I'm doing now. So it's definitely been a long, hard road, but I'm glad I did it. I'm one that, have to feel good about what I'm doing. And again, I'm not driven by money at all. I grew up, my mother moved back in with my grandparents. My grandparents were very wealthy, and and I was sent to a very privileged all boys private school in Richmond, Virginia, and was around a lot of wealth. I mean, a class of 60, and half the class is at Ivy League, two Harvard MBAs out of a class of 60. And it's so and they're movers and shakers in the world. And I didn't see a good correlation with rich and happiness. And so from an early age, I wasn't real impressed with money and chasing after it. So cows brought me a lot of solace at an early age, and so and I feel good about the industry. It's not only I love cows and I love being around them, but I feel it's a great symbiotic relationship when it's done right. I don't think it's a good one right now because the cow's getting the short end of the stick. But I think when they're treated properly and allowed to live a long, healthy life, I think it's a good relationship. They give us high quality, nutritious food, and we give them a great life. I think that I feel good about that, and I feel that that food, I watch now. I've been doing this selling direct for 5 years, and I see so many mothers that wean their children onto my milk, and I don't take that lightly. And to see their kids, and some kids, their mother's just distraught that they're not at the weight that they need to be for their age and their size, and they're freaking out and going on my food, put that weight on. It hits me, it makes me feel real good about what I do. Directly that, I'm helping somebody, and not only their health, there's strong correlation in studies with IQ, and the amount of animal protein consumed. And so I know, again, you can do it vegan. I'm not trashing the vegan diet, but I know that you're going to maximize IQ if you're going to feed, a high diet with my products. So I feel good about how the kids are growing and maturing and developing, and what I'm providing to them.
And the brain is, my understanding, about 60% fat.
Right.
So it needs that type of nutrients, especially at a young age,
Yeah, and
to
that's
develop.
the funny thing. One of the first reactions I got was from mothers was like, "Why are my kids so crazy for your milk? You know, like they've got all these other and they don't want anything but yours." And it's like my milk has way more. If you can't buy 5+% fat milk, and my protein's a little bit higher too. And what I found is a young palate. I mean, it's just evolutionarily, you're gonna do better eating more protein and fat. And so taste wise, I think our palates, at a young age, I think we lose it a little bit, but we really know that difference that no, this has more fat, this has more protein. I want this. And so they're just shocked. It's like, what is with your milk? It's like, it's very easy. Their body is getting what they crave, it's more fat and protein. And that's what, I mean, you can just hear their cells popping, dividing is like, and all those cells are covered in fat is like, and all their hormones that they're making are all pretty much, fat hormones. And it's like, don't deprive them. It kills me. They finally, I think, just changed it in New York. They had passed a bill many years ago that it was illegal to feed whole milk in schools in New York. It's like, that is insanity. It is absolutely insanity. So I think we're, again, the food pyramid has been, we've been so backwards for so long that I think finally we're starting to finally, I think, talk some sense and some logic about things that we can realize that kids have a much higher fat, demand than an adult. So it would make sense to feed them a little more fat than maybe you might need as a parent. But I think fat overall is good. I think fat mixed in with a high carb diet is trouble, but I think fat in, a
With high
low carb
protein.
diet and high protein, I think that's a very good diet and one that suited our species well for a long time.
Yeah, that's my diet, is whole foods, mostly fat and protein.
I don't. Unfortunately, I grew up in the when carbs were your good thing, so I have a little bit of a sweet tooth to me.
Oh, me too. I just don't bring it into the house.
Yeah, yeah, I try to keep it away from me as much as possible, and I definitely do a good job that way of limiting it. But the people that I've seen go, and I'm not condoning this or reporting, but the feedback and the stuff I've seen from it is interesting. It opens up doors. People that have gone on the true carnivore diets, like some of the body responses from that is just unbelievable. Where it's like, I don't want to go that route, and I don't think that's necessarily the healthiest route completely, but you're showing something that what we're doing over here is really unhealthy, and something over this direction is probably where we need to go. And so I think, yeah, definitely a higher fat, higher protein diet is a good one, and I try to live by that. And I think fermented foods are shown to be really important for our health and diet too. So
Especially the gut. And we
yep,
have, I'm trying to remember this. We have as many neurons in our brain as we have in our heart, as we have in our gut.
yep,
And so our gut has, if we're just feeding it carbs and sugar, then it becomes hungry for just the carbs and sugar.
right.
It takes some time to switch over to the fat and protein, but once you do, then the body is hungry for that because you have those enzymes, or that's what's in your gut. Then that's what it's been feeding off of. You switch it over from it's hungry for one thing to something else.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. No, and and that leads you to think about all the data that's coming out about the microbiome and how it, that's changing your microbiome, and then not only those things, but your immune system. You've got more immune cells lining your digestive tract than you've got anywhere else. So, as far as immunity, there's a big interaction happening there, and how all that stuff stimulates or supports your immune health too.
Would you share about the personality of these cows? Help to personify them, help us to understand what is the energy vibe.
Yeah, and it's lovely to see, and that was one thing I saw. So in Virginia, as I mentioned, the illegal immigrant wave hadn't hit when I left there, and so all the dairies were kind of limited in size. They were trying to grow, But again, when you were limited with just American born white people, black people, there really weren't that many American born Hispanics in that part of the country. So it was really white people, and there were a lot of black people um, that you could hire, but they just wouldn't stay. And so you could only really be as big as when that person didn't show up to milk, that it was still small enough that you could milk all the cows and sleeping 3 hours a night, go do your field work and come back until you found somebody. But when you milk, 3,000 cows, 10,000 cows, you can't milk the cows, and so you got to have that machine going. And so growing up, I raised dairy heifers. We didn't have a dairy. We had beef cattle. We had a herd of beef cows. But it wasn't until I went to the University of Georgia where I was actually working on functioning dairies. And that dairy, we milked like 120 cows. And then I graduated and managed a dairy in Virginia where I milked like 120 cows, 110. And I found that like right around that 100, 110, you could know every cow. You knew her personality, you knew her quirks, you knew what she wanted and what would piss her off and make her uncomfortable and get fidgety in the milking parlor or something. And so, but over that, you don't know. Like when I moved out here and was a herdsman on dairy, we milked 1,200 cows, and it was just impossible to know every cow. The only cows you knew were the cows that had gotten sick and you'd been treating and working on, or were really mean or something that really stood out. But your average cow is a good cow that just went through the motions. You never really spent any time with. So you never really got to know. And then what I've found on these big dairies is it really tempers a cow's personality. I think, as you mentioned, like cows kind of live in a little bit of fear and stress. And so they kind of hold back expressing their true personality. And I think another component of that is cows living on concrete. So concrete gets very slick and slippery, when you've got manure and it's staying wet, and you can have kind of algae kind of growing up on it, especially if you're flushing it with recycled manure water. You've always got a bacterial, fungal, algal load that's, recontaminating it and growing up on it. So cows kind of walk very tentatively on that. And the flush ones, you're on a slope because you want the water to flow down. So if you're in an angle, so cows are, off there too. So they're really tentative in how they get around, where cows like to run and do different things. And so you really restrict their personality in that. But then again, in a big size. So you rarely have many cows that are very expressive on big dairies. So on my dairy, where I'm only milking 22 cows, you really allow cows to express their personalities. And in growing and keeping up with markets, it's hard to do it from within. And so I have one client that I used to have, a dairy that used to be a client of mine that I really respect. It's the one dairyman that owns his dairy that still works with his cows. Like all the other dairies I worked with, you'd never see them even hardly there, but let alone getting shit on themselves. They're above that. That's something for Mexicans to do. And so this dairyman I really respect. And so at times when I need to buy cows, I buy from him. He's got really calm, nice cows, but it's a big dairy. And so, again, his cows have more personality there, but I still think in size and being on concrete, he's got outside lots, so they're not on concrete all the time. So they do get to express their behavior. But really, when they come to my place, it seems like they come out of their shell a little bit and get a little more rambunctious. And so seeing that difference, it's nice to have ones where you allow them to express their true being and who they are. Because you don't see much play on dairies, and I see a lot of play with my cows. And so I think when cows are feeling comfortable and is when you see more of that interaction and joyfulness. So
Is there another animal that you can equate them to? I know you have two golden retrievers. Is there any dog kind of energy in
oh
them?
yeah,
Or
yeah, they're very dog like. I mean, ones that you raise, and it's tough since I started. So when I as a commercial commodity dairy, I separated the calves, I fed the grain, I did everything. It's only been now 7 years that I stopped selling the commodity market and started separating the calves off, and that complicates things a little bit because you're not feeding that calf, and so that calf is not associating you with food. When you are the food source, it's a pretty good way to get something bonded to you, and you remove mom and you're just it. You get calves locked on you pretty good. And so some of my older cows that I've got that are retirees. So my very first calf is my favorite cow, Sissy. She turns 11 actually on the 8th. So I've got to buy her a chocolate birthday cake here in a couple days. She you know we're real tight, and I can call her and she comes to me, like a dog. And so the ones I have now, I have strong relationships, but it's just tougher because, again, they don't associate with me with food at all because they get it all from mom. And only times I really have to get on them is if they're, have something where I think they might be sick and I need to take a temperature, and then I stress them out by catching them and temping them with the thermometer. And so I don't always come with all the positive vibes around me, so but yeah, they are very dog-like. If you spend time with them, and they're creatures of habit more so than dogs. Dogs are creatures of habit, but cows are especially. You do something twice, 3 times, they got it, But don't expect them. If you do it different, then you throw them all off. So if you want to do something, do it the same way and be consistent about it, and it's not a problem with them. So
Help us understand the difference of a mother and child that get to stay together, cows, versus the ones that get taken apart immediately.
yeah, so from a health standpoint, so it's changed a little bit, but and still majority of dairies when they separate calves, they'll bottle feed them or bucket feed them usually twice a day. And so you go 12-hour intervals between, and they kind of underfeed them. So basically, and you feed for 6 to 10 weeks, and then you wean them, and then they go just on plant
And
food.
what's in that?
So dairies will be a mix a lot of times so you've got cows that are, especially on bigger dairies, commercial dairies, you're feeding a lot of grain. You've kind of weakened, you're pushing them to the edge of the cliff. So you're making them more susceptible for diseases too. You're kind of weakening their immune system isn't as strong and vibrant when you're feeding them 25 pounds of grain a day as my cows. And so you have more metritis, so uterine disease after calving. They have more contamination, and they can have infections in their uterus that need treating. They're the way sometimes you have to manage in the way they lay down. They lay in dirtier environments, and so little weakened immune system, they get more mastitis, and so you have to treat them from mastitis. And so you're treating animals all the time on these big dairies. You have a hospital that's got 10 to 100 cows that are being treated or are on withdrawal. So you treated them for X number of days, and they still have 5 days, 3 days till their milk is good. So they stay in the hospital, and you can't put their milk in the tank. So all the drugs that are approved to be used on, and this is a big thing that veterinarians, and this is something the dairy industry takes very seriously and doesn't let things slip through the cracks. The milk, the dairy products you're consuming don't have antibiotics in them. They're very serious. Well, they don't have beta lactams. They don't have penicillins in them, which the main thing about that is people are reactions to penicillins, are sensitive to them, allergic reactions. And you can get allergic reactions from drinking milk that has residue from penicillin. And so historically, we've tested that forever. Some of the weird new antibiotics, they don't test every load for that, but every load of milk is tested for penicillins. But so the dairy industry if you get in trouble for that, is big deal. And if you get in trouble for that multiple times, they won't let you sell milk anymore. And so that's the one thing producers take very seriously. And so they have very strict hospital pens where they'll sort cows off, and they'll even have separate milking parlors where the cow won't even go through the traditional milking parlor that the milk goes to the regular tanks. They have separate systems, so there's no way their milk will go in there. So all that milk, then instead of dumping it down the drain, they'll feed that to calves. But those are coming from cows that have mastitis, that have other issues that change the quality of the milk. Mastitis directly changes the quality of the milk, but if you got, terrible pneumonia, metritis, that quality of your milk is different than when you're, maximum,
And they're feeding
health.
that to the baby
They'll be
cows.
feeding that to baby calves. Now, maybe they'll pasteurize that to lower contamination levels of it, but they'll be feeding that as the protein and fat source to the calves. That if that doesn't meet all the calves that you've got, you can buy powdered milk, and so you'll reconstitute it with water, X number of scoops and this, and then you'll feed that the same way, either in a bottle or a bucket. Or nowadays, on some of the bigger, more progressive dairies, they'll have automatic feeding systems. So calves can come up more than twice a day. So twice a day is you got a crew that comes out, fills all the bottles, comes out, puts it in their hutch, and the calves drinks from this little holder. And then you come around and take it after they're done and wash the bottles. And then 12 hours later or 10 hours later, another crew comes and does it, or you do it before you go home, kind of thing. And so those calves, that's not really natural. I mean, if you look at a calf like my calves on their mother, they're drinking 20 times, 40 times a day, lots of little servings over the course of the day. And so you're not getting these slugs and then huge gaps. And so that's just not natural. And that affects, how the calf does in digestibility. But calves and most all calves, will get some level of diarrhea or something, and they'll be feeling a little off. Well, in that hutch system with the bottles, well, that guy comes and puts that bottle in the holder and goes down. And when everybody's done and he's putting bottles, if you haven't finished that bottle, he might get in there for a second or two and work with you, but he doesn't have the time, or she doesn't have the time to work with you. And boom, that milk's down. And then 12 hours later, you got your another chance. And so you notice the calves that have diarrhea that are out with their moms feel a little punky. Mom comes up, gives them a few licks, perks them up a little bit. They go back and they take a couple sips, and then they've had enough. But they're still drinking over the course of time. So they might be drinking less than they were because they might be feeling a little punkier, but they're getting what they need, and mom's there. And then another thing, there was a study done many years ago. So they found that these calves on hutches, so you can take cows, and there are many cows, and commercial dairies do this. It used to be just on research university settings. They can fistulate cows. So they'll take, and you'll see them at fairs they used to have. So they'll do surgically, they'll cut a hole in the side of a cow and put this port into the digestive cow, usually the rumen, the big, huge fermentation vat of the cows, the 55-gallon tub that feed goes into first, where all the bacteria and fungi and protozoa are that do the true digestion of the plant products. And they'll put a port in there so you can open it and scoop stuff out. And they did studies where they took the juice from there, so it's loaded with all those microflora. I mean, the organisms per milliliter from a rumen is just crazy. If you put a little drop on a microscope and look at it, the stuff that's teeming in there is unbelievable. And they did a study where they took that juice and they added 5 cc's of that juice to the 2-quart bottle, 3-quart bottle of milk that they feed the calf, that the calves did so much better as far as health-wise, prevented mainly digestively. They didn't have diarrhea and scours as much, and when they did better than the calves that didn't have it. And it makes sense, and it's like, and I see it, and so it's like, I see the calf out there all the time, and the calf licking her mom's mouth and the mother licking its house. And the cow all the time, if you talking about chewing a cud, the cow has to spit up, eructate the plant product in the rumen to chew some of it up further. It's not only there are lots of different digestive processes. The first one is massification, so breaking it down with your teeth. And cows are really quick about, evolutionarily, it's kind of dangerous to go out in the open fields, as when the lions see you and come get you. So you get out there and you eat like crazy and you swallow it, and then you go back in the woods, hide, and then you further digest, and you burp it back up basically into your mouth and chew it then further. So you break it down, but you don't take that time while you're out in the field doing it stuff. And so that stuff, their mouth is always full because they're burping, stuff from digestive, material from their room and back into their mouth, chewing it, swallowing it back again. So their mouth is loaded with digestive bacteria and stuff. And so licking the calf is inoculating that calf. So it's like, oh, well, that's what you're doing. And so it's like, well, here it is naturally. I don't have to inject 5 cc's of rumen juice that I have to collect from a, artificially, surgically altered cow, here's where it's happened naturally. And so it's so many things that have opened my eyes like, oh, and that's why that calf is doing better. So it's volume, quality of the milk, it's right out of the teat. And it's interesting, these calves, so I share, I just get what they leave me. And I've just got a calf now that's 5 days old. That little calf can hardly drink anything compared to what the mom's milking. Like cows let down milk when they first calve, and it builds to about 2 months is where they peak, 2 to 3 months, and then it starts to slowly taper off. So it's called a milk curve. And so cows initially are milking a whole lot more milk, dairy cows, than the calf can consume. That usually tends to meet at about 3 months or so. That calf's then at the size that it can start drinking all that milk and leaves me nothing. But those first couple months, I'm sharing with them, and it's interesting. So the calf, most of my cows have 4 quarters that are producing quality milk that I'm milking that goes into the food supply. And those calves have access to all 4 of those, and those calves have such refined palates, so there's quality of that milk. So all mammals shed somatic cells into their milk. Just they're sloughing epithelial cells that are making milk. Some of those, just die and get sloughed in the milk. You've also got the immune system comes and is checking on stuff, and white blood cells come and get dumped into the milk. And if you got an active infection going on, the immune system is called more, and more cells come, and so you can measure those, and that's one of the things when the state comes and samples my products and my raw milk, they measure that, and there's legal levels that the FDA has in that pasteurized milk ordinance that I'm not allowed to sell milk above these, and I'm testing for that and looking for that all the time. And every quarter is different. Every quarter of the cow encounters the world differently, and so has different levels of that. Because as you have infections or different things, you're changing that, and it can change it permanently as far as how many cells come. And so it's interesting when I have measured each one of those quarters, and when you go to milk those cows that aren't milked out completely by those calves, and they leave you some, they always drain the quarter that has the lowest somatic cell count, so the highest quality milk, and they work their way around. So they're getting the highest quality milk. They have such a refined palate that not only are they getting, their mom's protein and fat, but they're getting the best protein and fat from their mom, not clouded by any ancillary white blood cells, or minimal. And so it's like, they get to pick and choose from the buffet of the best, whereas calves that are in the hutch, they get whatever, and that you better drink it now or you get nothing again for 12 hours. And so,
Yeah, it sounds like they're getting milk from sick cows that maybe is pasteurized to bring some of that sickness down.
yeah, so the calves are at a deficit, born into, and that happens around the world. It's pretty standard for any commodity market, buying dairy, that the dairy producers that sell into that remove the calves immediately after birth.
Products that have gotten really popular lately in the supplement space in dairy are colostrum. We see a lot of colostrum. My understanding of that is that's the first milk that the mother makes after.
So all mammals, they're one thing that really separates us, and one of the defining things when taxologists refer to us differently or separate us is how placentation occurs in us. And we have much different placentation than cows. Cows have what's called, I believe it's syndesmochorial placentation. So how the placenta and the endometrium kind of interact and how porous they are. Humans have one that is very porous, so a lot of antibody and immunity is transferred while gestation is occurring over the placenta. But in cows with syndesmochorial placentation, that doesn't happen at the level of humans. And so calves are born with very little active immunity, or acquired immunity. What makes our immune system really good is memory and like recognizing here's a problem and boom, having cells that all of a sudden can multiply and quarantine and kill that problem very quickly. And more memory you get, the faster you are at responding to that. And that's what you acquire from your mother. And we get it again through the placenta very well, but cows don't get it. So they're born very naive. They have an immune system, but it doesn't have memory at all. And so it's very weak compared to one that does have memory. And the way you get that memory is in that colostrum is loaded with antibodies. So, and the calf for the first 12 to 24 hours, their digestive tract acts very differently. So it doesn't, our immune system, when you provided a very long amino acid chain along, or a long amino acid chain, and one that has its secondary and tertiary and quaternary structure of a protein, those get chopped up very quickly in our stomach and are absorbed as constituent amino acids. In these initial calves, for the first 12 to 24 hours, they don't break those proteins down, and the antibodies are mostly proteins, and their intestine is leakier, so they can absorb these antibodies intact. So normally, after that 12 hours, they can't absorb those big molecules like that. But for those first 12 to 24 hours, they can. So they can acquire that active acquired immunity from their mother if they get their colostrum in the first 12 to 24 hours. And so it's very different. It's got all of those extra antibodies. It's got much higher fat. It's got much higher protein. It's got much higher minerals, vitamins. It's completely different than this. And that's the biggest difference. The first milk, and then it tapers for the first couple, 3, 4 days, and then changes into this type of milk.
Speak to companies that are selling that colostrum. Is that a scalable thing? Is it really overflow?
It's over. You would get dairy. I mean, a dairy might limit it from their bull calves, but their female calves, that's their future. So they're going to make sure that they get good quality colostrum. But especially Holsteins and Jerseys, what we've selected for volume, they produce way more quantity than one calf needs. And so most dairies historically have always banked some, and I've got some frozen, in case you have something and you're testing your colostrum. So sometimes you have, especially a first calf heifer, her first time, she just doesn't have that strong antibody levels in there. And so the calf is not going to get as good. So you thaw some from an old cow that tested really high, and you give that to that calf. But you still have above and beyond that. So especially in Canada, companies started contracting with dairies and then buying their surplus colostrum and turning it into a business. Initially as a supplement for calves, and somebody has just one animal. They don't have a dairy, or a beef cow person. They don't have a dairy to have a bank of colostrum. That was your way to keep this calf, to give it immunity, but then it bled into the health supplement stuff. So,
what type of plants are your cows eating?
So mine, alfalfa hay. So that's alfalfa has been selected for protein. So most alfalfa, high quality dairy alfalfa, is running low 20s to mid 20s percent protein. So that's your main protein source you're looking for. And then you also get that from your pasture, especially spring pasture, when it's really green and growing fast. That's when it's at its highest protein level there. So you're getting good protein then. This time of year, you're lower quality protein on your pastures. And then I feed corn silage. So in early September, all the corn, mostly it's grown in this part of the country, is chopped to the ground. So the whole plant is chopped up into little bits and then packed. So the air gets packed out of it, and then it ferments, and then it's preserved you can feed it for 2-3 years in the future. And that provides you more of an energy source. So it's a good balance. And so the alfalfa is not only providing you protein, but it's also your fiber kind of scratch factor. The rumen, the digestive tract of cows, need that longer stem kind of stuff to really maximize the health of their digestive system. And then the silage does a little bit of that, but not as much as the alfalfa. But the silage is doing a lot of giving you the energy you need. So to grow an animal right and then to make, good quality milk, you need energy and protein to be in a balance. You really can't be out of whack on either one, or you really mess things up for the animal health wise and then food wise too.
Speak to hormones, antibiotics, vaccines. What does that look like in commercial practices, and what's
Yeah,
that
it's a
look
big
like in?
deal. Big deal. I mean, again, you're pushing cows to the edge, feeding them such high amounts of grain to maximize energy, to maximize milk production that, their immune system needs all the help it can get. And so, as a veterinarian, you're doing a lot with treatment protocols and drugs and different things like that. And so, yeah, there's a good bit used. The U.S. is, though, really trying to reduce the amount that's used, and Europe is ahead of us on that, and there's some, pretty restrictive stuff done to why don't we try some of this butter
Oh,
while we're
please.
talking?
Oh,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
really good stuff.
Yeah,
So
tell
this
me
is
about it.
cultured stuff, butter. So this is if you go to France, a lot of Europe, you'll find cultured butter. So what you do is you take the cream and you culture that and you ferment it and lower the pH on it. And so it basically turns it into a creme fraiche. Creme fraiche is a cultured cream. And basically you churn then the creme fraiche. And that's what this is. And so it's a lower pH. Texture wise, it's creamier. It's got a little bit, with a fermented product, it's got a different taste to it, which a lot of people like, but the texture people really comment on. And then it's a lot more stable because it's got a lower pH off the fridge, and it'll last for weeks and weeks and weeks out of the fridge. And so people like that also. And my cream, again, as I mentioned, it's not homogenized. So you're starting with a better cream, and then I'll add anything to my cream, and at a low temperature, short time, pasteurize it so it's the highest quality cream. And then you can also separate cream and have it thinner or thicker. And I might set it the thickest, so it's running low 40% fat. So your cream is not all fat. There's buttermilk in there, and so there's a percent fat of your cream, and so mine's the highest that you really find, and so that's represented in here. So it's all kind of the best, the best, the best, and then culturing, having a fermented product is kind of the cherry on the top, I think.
Now
So,
we're talking.
so it's really good stuff. So if you want to try a little bit of it, so it's
Please.
still thawing on us here, so it'll get
Do you
better.
ship this ever? Or
No,
yeah.
I haven't as of yet.
Oh, yeah. That's really easy to love.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love the texture of that. And
The
the taste.
creaminess is there. The buttery taste is there. It feels really light. I mean, it feels healthy. It's a real privilege to even have the opportunity to buy products like this. If someone's wondering, someone's not in Colorado and you're not currently shipping these things, so they don't have access to you. But if you're in Colorado, where can people find you?
This time of year, I'm at a lot of farmers market. So in Denver, the City Park Farmers Market on Saturdays, Sundays South Pearl Farmers Market, and the Highlands Market. And in Lafayette has a market now, and Sundays that I'm doing. And Breckenridge has started a market on Thursday afternoons from 4 to 7 that I'm at through the end of September. And then Netherland picks up my product, and they sell my products out of their booth at their farmers market. So you can find my stuff. Kip there runs their booth, has all my stuff.
Oh, I
So
know Kip.
yeah, Kip's great.
Yeah, Kip's
Yeah.
great. Have
Yeah.
you, my best market is the Vale Market. Have you
So
communicated with
Breck is
them?
my first market, and I the main reason I did is not only to test the water, but because it's a Thursday, it's a free time. It's hard, Vail being Sunday, to give up my Denver ones to do that one. So I just started in the end of June with Breckenridge, and the response has been so overwhelming that I think it would make sense to, especially for next summer, think about, trying to expand into some of those others and maybe Steamboat and something else. Yeah. So, because they're definitely underserved for local good dairy in those areas is what I'm finding. And having pasteurized and the raw, then that opens up even more doors and selling opportunities for me. So what I really need, and I think it'll be is I I have no problem, making it work, penciling out for me when the markets are running, it's when the market's in, and it's very hard to connect with people that still want your product, but it's just convenience is a big part of it for people, and farmers market make it very convenient for people, and they make it part of their social kind of event, so it's a, "Let's go do the market and check lots of boxes," picking up lots of different things, whereas when the markets end, it seems like people at each market disband to 10 to 15 different, shopping or grocery stores in the area, and there's no way for me to be at all those places. So people fall off for 4 to 6 months on me, and so trying to find revenues that, are there in December, January, February, March is, something that I'm really looking for, and I think those markets up in the mountains could then be, something that I could continue to have a drop off maybe once a week out there that I'm hoping.
What about a CSA model?
Well, I do a CSA model, but it's not a you have to buy so much a week. I give people a little more flexibility, but they get discounts, and so it locks people in. Or they prepay for stuff, but it's a little more open ended on when they can finish, and so people can take off or really minimize orders, or they'll not order in their winter. So the people that I think would buy the CSA continue to buy from me through the winter. And so I don't know if I would necessarily pick up anymore if I had a defined, through the winter, you have to pick up this. I doubt I'd pick up that much more business from that.
Can we try a few more and you
Yeah,
speak to them?
sure.
Thank you.
So a couple big items of mine are, and if you want to
Yeah.
try those yourself and see the difference between them, are my strained yogurts. So everybody is familiar with the Greek yogurt, and so what you do is basically you heat the milk up and get rid of all the other competing bacteria, cool it back down, and then you add a culture that's a combination of different lactobacillus organisms that are beneficial for gut health. And so you have a pure inoculation of those specific bacteria. And that's what I've got here. And that's what Greek, and I've also got another strained yogurt in a different culture, which I call a skyr, which is an Icelandic style yogurt. If you're familiar with any of those, that you'll find now in the grocery store under a Sigi or an Icelandic provisions label, or I think Faya has some that's similar to that. So the biggest thing is the Greek has more of a tartness to it, an acidity, a pucker factor to it that the skyr lacks or is very mild. And so it's the same process. You incubate, you inoculate, incubate for roughly 7 to 9 hours. You've got a yogurt that's kind of the consistency of what your Yoplait is, that has all the whey still in it. And you scoop that up and put it in a straining bag that I hang from a straining table, that the bag only allows the liquid portion, the whey, which has the lactose and your B vitamins and some protein, your whey protein, and a little bit of fat out, but holds back your casein protein and your bigger fat particles, and some of your lactose stays in, depending on how much whey stays in. And then after so many hours, I take the bags down and then scoop them into these containers, and that's what you've got there. And so it's the same process. Nutritionally, these two are the same. These big containers would have about 44 grams of fat in them and 42 grams of protein and 26 grams of carbs. And so it really comes down to those different lactobacillus strains produce a little different flavor. That big is different. This is a little bit tartar, and that's less so. And the skyr, I think, has a little bit creamier texture maybe to your tongue. Because I know I make a low fat or a no fat with my skim milk with the skyr, and a lot of people buy that and just swear that there's fat in it, and it's because that culture just the texture of it makes it feel creamier. But There's no fat in it, my skim milk, so I know they're not getting any, but they taste like it does.
I
So,
want maximum protein and fat. What should I go for?
and minimum carbs,
Sure.
ricotta.
Ricotta.
Yeah.
Wow. Give us an idea of what these cost
Mhm.
versus maybe what you can get at the grocery store.
I'm selling these 16-ounce containers for $9. And I haven't looked recently, but I think kind of similar, higher fat yogurt that you get of this size, I think is somewhere like mm, 6, 7, 8. So I'm not that far off with the
Yeah. And to
yogurt.
me, it's a no brainer. It's like this might be 10 times better.
Yeah,
I mean, just the energetics of it.
right.
And we've only talked about that a little bit, but it's like I'm consuming something from a happy
Yeah,
cow that's been cared for versus something from a who knows what type of terrible life
right.
another. It's like just the energetics of it alone, let alone the cleanliness and the quality. And I see it says grade A. What does that mean?
Well, so that's an FDA label, and there's certain
Mm,
products that are classified under grade A that have different quality standards, and it's the highest quality standards of all dairy. So that's why people love posting grade A, like this is the highest quality of stuff. So like milk, yogurts, some cottage cheese, those things all fall under grade A's. Whereas butter, most of your cheeses aren't considered grade A. So the main thing comes down to how well, how easy can it become contaminated and grow that contaminant really well. Like if I contaminate the butter, if I drop, I poke it and contaminate it with a finger a little bit there. Well, you're going to have a contamination that's going to be right where I poke my finger, and you'll see some off coloring in time there, but it's not going to spread all through that butter and contaminate all that butter and make it horrible. And it's hard for things to grow, and butter is so concentrated fat. There are not many organisms that grow really well. You don't grow salmonella, you don't grow E. coli H0157, you don't grow Campylobacter in butter like that. So it's not a great median for growing the bugs that make us sick. This is one of the best medians for growing any bacteria. You find a lot of growing cultures use milk, a lot of semen extender to like keep semen healthy and happy use milks historically. And so this can get out of hand really fast, and yogurt similarly can be more liquid, and stuff can diffuse and contaminate the whole container rather quickly than hard cheese. You're not gonna contaminate a hard pressed cheddar, when it's already pressed. Like bacteria can't move through it. It's too concentrated, too low a moisture content, those type of things where it's really not conducive to growing the bad bugs. So grade A is really, and the scrutiny and the level of things, like they don't even, when they come and test my products, they don't sample this. They don't sample my ricotta because there's no real chance of me growing anything there that's going to make anybody sick. But where people get sick historically is milk, and not so much the yogurt, but they kind of classify yogurt under everything's together. So my strain yogurts, which have a very low pH, so these are running like 4.6 pH or so. That's really inhibitory, and that's why these things um unopened last close to 2 months, open are like 3-4 weeks, and it's mainly that pH. Um, and so that's not really a big deal. But like the yo plays that have all the whey in it are a little more liquid. Those are a little more susceptible to growing stuff. And the milk again is your best. And the flavored milks are even worse because you're adding sugar to it, so you're supercharging the formula. So if something bad gets in there, it's got even more energy source to grow from. So you have to be really careful, and your quality control standards have to be at their best when you're selling grade A products.
Now, how do you think about plant-based milks?
I mean, I've got no problem with it. I see it them more of like fruit drink or something like that, some other plant drink. What I don't like is them riding the coattails and the positivity of milk. It's not a milk, and I think you really confuse people with that. And I get confused in the damn yogurt aisle all the time. When I used to buy yogurt, I would take it and almost be ready to pay for it and look, and it's, non-dairy. It's like, ah, dang it, like it should be very clear what is dairy and what isn't, and it's very confusing what they have, and I don't like that, and I think, and I don't like the fact that the dairy industry does bad things behind really good marketing, but I don't like the fact of somebody co-opting our marketing. Like, I did pay for that marketing. They took money from our milk checks that helped to pay for Got Milk and other stuff that, I was doing good, and I was trying to promote a good dairy industry. And so I like good marketing. And so I don't want some non-dairy farmer to benefit from, our marketing and our positivity. So that's the only beef I've got with them. I don't mind them having it. I just, why you got to market it as milk. So
To ride your coattail.
yeah, right.
There's a lot.
And to confuse people that it's all the same, and it's clearly not the same. And you're putting your baby, you again have to do some serious math and some serious adding in other stuff if you're thinking feeding this as, your baby's milk source. So
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's podcast, B Micro, the easiest way to sneak vegetables into any meal. Due to soil depletion, GMOs, and monocropping, Americans are not getting enough nutrients. So in 2018, I founded B Micro, the first freeze-dried microgreens company in the US to help Americans get more concentrated natural nutrients into their diet. Microgreens are a phase in the plant's life when they're 14 days old and naturally the most concentrated in vitamins, minerals, nutrients, all the good things that we need. Our microgreens are grown here in the US in soil in a greenhouse. They're certified USDA organic and regenerative organic. We grow, wash, and freeze dry them to extend their 1 week shelf life to over 1 year, allowing us to ship anywhere in the US without the worry of spoilage. We have 2 flavors, broccoli, backed by over 2,000 studies on sulforaphane and its powerful detox benefits, and a blend of red cabbage, radish, and broccoli, the most potent detox formula we've tested, offering you the most bang for your buck. Easily sneak these microgreens in any meal. Eggs, smoothies, pizza, pasta, even your kids' mac and cheese, you can't even taste it. Use code STEVE15 to save at bmicro.farm. If people are wanting to start introducing dairy back into their lives, maybe people have just been having a really hard time with it. I mean, when people come to you, they can consume your products pretty much worry-free and they're far from here. They can't get your products. Help them with what to look for.
it's tough because it's so hard to be able to sell direct to people. It really limits, I think, relationship with farmers, and I think that's one of the things I would recommend the most of all farming, but especially I think animal ag is meet your farmer and go look at the animals, where that are being raised is a big thing. And, from social media, a lot of the ones I follow that I know how they treat their animals, one thing that's a tell is real close up pictures of cows' faces or calves and stuff, but you never get an idea of, well, what are they standing in? Where are they lying down? If they're not showing any of that, like big picture, again, where are they laying down? All that type of stuff. What are they really eating? Where are they existing on their social media? And they have social media. There's a reason they're not showing you that. They don't want you to see that. And so that should raise flags right off the bat. And in Colorado and many other states, ag states, they pass laws, ag gag laws. So it's illegal to post videos from those farms,
That's crazy.
And so, the government's running cover for you. Like, they don't want it to even get out. Let's do this, all this lying marketing, and there's no way the real story is going to get out. And again, all the ancillary industry and the people that might say, like, oh yeah, this is crap, they want it to continue because they've got a wife and kids or a husband and, or kids to support. And they've got the blinders on, and it's like, and they don't even, I think, want to admit to themselves that I went into veterinary medicine or I devoted my life to this and it's for shit.
Because I love animals.
Yeah, I love animals.
I'm over here supporting the abuse of animals.
And that's why I think my profession, if you look at rates and profession, veterinarians are the top.
Really?
Always the top. And it's been the worst. And in my class, I've got one that committed suicide. My favorite professor in vet school committed suicide. It's all through the profession. And I think that's a big point, I mean, and it's type A personalities that have succeeded. And then you get to this point where you've succeeded and you've got everything you want, and you're doing nothing that you thought you'd be doing, and you're helping crap, and I think that pushes a lot of people over the edge, unfortunately. And when I met a young undergraduate Sunday at the market that is wanting to go to vet school and is probably will, and that's what I told her is like, don't get stuck in this path that the industry and everything forces you on and doesn't allow you to look off of, like veterinary medicine. I love it. I wouldn't change anything about it because it teaches you physiology, pathophysiology without, being distorted by industry and money. You get that, use that. That's very good information, but leave all the crap behind, all the industry and even that small animal, it's changed so much. It's all about money, and all the ancillary industry, they come in and they tell you, buy our test kit, this thing, you can raise your average transaction. Now you can charge this, and they teach you and all these, professional businesses that come in, they take over practices, because veterinarians aren't good at raising the money and charging more and really leveraging that human animal bond, which I find is horrible. I mean, what veterinary medicine did is saw what human medicine did and said, I'm as smart as those guys. I've got the same education. I should make as much as them. So let's follow that model. It's a shit model. Like, why are you following that? It doesn't work to begin with. Why do we want to go down that path? And I think that's we're eating what we've sown now, and people don't like it. A lot of people make money and focus on money, but I think we're horrible as a profession. I think we've turned it into a rich person or the people that own pets now, and that's not what it should be. Every kid deserves to grow up with a cat or a dog, and so I think across the board, the profession's lost sight of. I mean, all of us started because we loved pets. We didn't start because we wanted money. I mean, if we wanted money, we would have gone the med route because it's the same education and it's just harder, sometimes harder to go vet school than med. And so we would have clearly gone that way if we wanted more money. So obviously we picked less money because we liked something and then we got sucked into it by just everything. I mean, not only it's the industry that makes money that wants us to be the front for them because people held veterinarians in such a high esteem and trusted them. So use them as cover to get all your stuff to buy. But, the vet schools went along with it too, and just became a part of that whole system. I mean, when you go to vet school, you buy dog food. They have a little hole in the vet school where you can buy Hill's dog food at next to nothing. They get you locked into Hill's, pet food. So when somebody asks you to buy, or when you got your vet practice, you're selling Hill's pet prescription food to them. Every meal, you never ate, lunch or dinner while you're in vet school because all you had to do was sit through some little lecture that the student rep from Pfizer, Upjohn, Merck, Marielle, all those drug companies were just pumping tons of money. I mean, when they passed, tell me this, Congress passed a law, you can't take doctors on pay lavish trips and all this stuff, because of bias, you're going to do things. They never did that for vets. So veterinarians are immune from that bias. That doesn't affect us. And those companies do it all the time. Fancy fishing trips and all the fancy spots, ski trips, different stuff. They spend tons of money on vets. And so, it starts at an early point. You're getting all your meals. You're a poor vet student, and here are all your meals.
They're just training you.
And they're just getting you sucked into doing whatever they say.
And is it the pharmaceuticals that are pushing the most? Same as within the human medical industry?
I mean, they're the biggest drivers of it because money, they make more money and money feeds it. But why are the vet schools giving them, so much free right, in the vet schools and to have so much leverage over their vet students? And you have a lot of times at CSU, Pfizer gave the clinical science department free vaccine that then they could charge and generate money from, to all of their clients. And so it's just like all this kind of money-making kind of scheme, and it's all through the vet school, and it's just like, what are we doing here?
I don't think people are talking about it.
Nobody
Never heard
talks
of it.
about it. And the people in it that are doing it, they don't even really see it because everybody's, no, we all do it. Yeah,
This is
everybody
how we
does
do
it.
it.
This is we do it.
This
And
is
you just,
normal
again,
now.
the abnormal becomes normal. and you just don't, nobody steps back and just really looks at it, from that 30,000-foot view. Like, what are we really doing here? We're really looking out for the animals, or we're looking out for vet students, I mean, why are rates so high? Maybe some of this is affecting it. They don't talk about any of that stuff.
Well, thank you for taking that step back, sharing in these types of ways. I could talk to you for hours. I mean, your passion, your dedication, your articulation, all the work that you've done. Just really putting your money where your mouth is, and taking care of these animals, so that you can then take care of yourself and take care of your clients. I mean, it's beautiful. Love to give you a gift, one of my products right
Oh,
here.
awesome.
This is a mixture. It's a new product. It's a mixture of broccoli, radish, and red cabbage microgreens. So add that on whatever you like. And we've been neighbors
Yeah.
several times before, and you've heard me talk a lot about it. What are your thoughts on microgreens?
Oh, I'm a big believer in it. I mean, so as I mentioned, my parents divorced early, and I grew up basically with my grandmother, and she did all the cooking, and she would have been a vegetarian easily. I mean, she only cooked meat because just you cooked meat as a a Southern mom back in that time, and for your kids, and she thought it was important, but she didn't. She liked vegetables, and so I always saw the benefit of greens, and she was a big, and we planted gardens, so I've always been a big believer in greens, and I always worry that I'm not getting enough greens, and so I like having a easier, simpler way to include good microgreens into my diet. So I've always been a big believer in what you're doing, Steven. So
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Yeah.
Appreciate you. Anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I think we touched on a lot of good things. I think, as you mentioned, I want what I'm doing. The biggest reason I'm doing it is to try to affect change within the industry. It gives me something to do, it gives me a living, but I can do that. I wouldn't feel as positive and passionate about what I do doing something else, but I could make a living doing something else, and easier. I'd have a lot more free time than what I'm doing right now. But I'm trying to affect the industry. I love the industry. I love the community that existed when I was a kid. The dairy industry was part of the fiber of the community, and I think and there was a human animal bond of that farmer and his cows, his or her cows, and I think we can get back to that. And but I think we really need to educate people, and that's what I've tried to do. And so I appreciate you helping with that. And as you mentioned, like, what do people do? And I think you know try to seek out more local. You don't have to do raw, but raw is probably the easiest for getting a small dairy farmer, just because he or her doesn't have to check all the FDA hurdles that are a little overwhelming sometimes. And I probably wouldn't have been able to get through it were it not for my veterinary training through all the kind of procedures and labs and regulations and stuff that I'm already used to. So, but I think try to have a relationship with all your farmers, and especially animal ag, because I think it's easier for them to subjugate animals and make a horrible life and pretend something else is going on. But it's very hard if you come and look at that farm for them to pretend something's different. If you know a few things, like, don't just take a tour and drive through, like, walk around, look and see if animals are moving, if they're interacting, if they're lame, where are they lying on? Are they on concrete all the time? Are they clean? Are they got dung hanging from them? Or are they shit stained where they've probably been laying in manure all the time and they just got clean the day before you showed up? Those type of things, and if you go with the animals, are they really apprehensive of you to where they've been around really aggressive handlers, or are they comfortable if you get close to the fence and they want to come and look at you? Those animals have probably been around calmer, less aggressive people. So just a few little things, if you go and look at the farm, can really help you to weed out the people who aren't doing it right. So I'd encourage you to go and find, some local people and get a relationship. You should have a relationship with your food, and that creates local community and keeps the money there, and I think just provides benefits all around. So
Where can people learn more about you and Five Freedoms?
I have my website, fivefreedomsdairy.com, and you can follow me on Instagram, Five Freedoms Dairy. I post a lot about the dairy there. Facebook, I have Five Freedoms Dairy there, which is basically just feeding from Instagram. Or come visit the farm, reach out to me through the website, and come visit if you can, and I'd love to show you around and point out some of the things and have you meet some of the cows.
You're in Fort Collins?
I'm in Longmont now.
Oh, you are?
Yeah,
Okay,
North
great.
Longmont.
Okay, I was just looking at this
Yeah,
and
I
I
hadn't
thought,
changed the labels
oh,
on
that's
that
great
yet,
news.
so
That's
yep.
closer than, oh, that's great.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah, just about 30 minutes outside of Boulder.
Oh,
So.
good news.
Yeah.
Okay. Yay. Well, thank you so much.
No, I appreciate you having me, Steve. It's good talking
You know,
with you.
I'm Stephen Cowan, so I think some of my family worked with cows
Yeah,
as well.
right.
So another little kindred spirit moment there too.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, I think
Team cows.
historically, probably a lot of us had relationships with a lot of animals. You know, I think the human-animal bond, that's one thing they beat into our heads when I started vet school, and it really resonated with me. I think it's so right that it's a relationship, you know, it's not just, you know, you can't just, I don't think you can be a good dairy farmer if you don't ever touch your cows. Like, you've got to know your cows. And I think that's where I think it limits the size. Like, industrial scale, we were always meant to have a relationship with our animals. And when you get beyond that, we've really distorted things. I mean, we're so different. Go back to diet and just everything. We need to get back to where we existed with animals for thousands of years is what we need to do again.
Man, there's so much more I'd love to ask you, and I hope you'll join me here again.
Yeah, appreciate it, Stephen.
Thank
Good to be
you.
here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
See you, everybody.